Tonight, we're talking about sports stories that focus on inclusion and accessibility and how this can change people's lives. So, Amy, did you know about Ludwig Gutman, who lived from 1899 to 1980? He was a Jewish neurosurgeon who fled Nazi Germany as a refugee and became a pioneer in England, working to restore purpose and heal the bodies of people who had experienced spinal paralysis. He's credited as the creator of what we know today as the Paralympics. These officially began in 1960, and last year in Tokyo, there were 4,403 athletes in the Paralympics, the most ever.
You know, that is an amazing story. I think that there is a movie about him also that is pretty inspirational. And, you know, in the United States alone, Holland, 1 in 4 people have some type of physical disability. Another organization that promotes inclusion held its first Olympics only 8 years after the first Paralympics. And this was the first International Special Olympics. It was held in July of 1968 at Soldier Field in Chicago. And, you know, I am really looking forward to having this conversation and learning about other athletic events and resources and programs.
Me too. And, you know, taking it just a little bit closer to home, I used to live not far from Taylor's First Baptist Church. And when I would go over there, I would see the wheelchair basketball folks practicing. I like to sit and watch them. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm glad that I wasn't paired against, because I'm horrible at basketball. I couldn't play basketball, even if I just start laughing because I'm so bad at it. So I'm sure it was fun to watch.
Well, we are excited to welcome Skeeter Powell, the founder of David's Table, to the conversation. Glad to have you with us, Skeeter.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and also we want to welcome Carly Mellor, who is the Area Director of Special Olympics in South Carolina. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Hi, I'm Holland Webb.
Hi, I'm Amy Boland.
And you're listening to The Afterword, a conversation about the future of words.
Well, both of you have personal stories that are inspiring. And so in just 60 seconds each, would you mind sharing the Cliff Notes version of your life and who you are? And we'll start with you, Carly.
Awesome. So I am born and raised in Ohio, where I ended up going to the University of Toledo. There I received my bachelor's degree in recreational therapy and then became a certified therapeutic recreation specialist. After school, I finished an internship up in Michigan at a facility that specialized in spinal cord injury and brain injury. And then the day after I finished that, my husband and I moved to Greenville, mostly in search of warmer weather and all the fun stuff that the upstate offers. And then after we got settled here in Greenville, I began working at National Healthcare of Greenville as a recreation therapist there. That's a skilled nursing facility. And then I moved on, continuing to work in the senior adult population as the program coordinator for Senior Action, which is a really amazing senior center here in Greenville. But when I came across the opportunity to join the therapeutic rec team at Greenville County Rec, I knew it was just the right chance for me. It was the perfect change that I needed. So now in this position, I serve, as you said, as the area director for Special Olympics Greenville. And I also serve as an administrator for Camp Spearhead, which is a special needs camp for children and adults.
Wow.
That's so cool. Yeah, I didn't know you were at Camp Spearhead. That's so fun.
Yes, it's kind of fun.
All right. What about you? What's the 60-second Cliff Notes version of Skeeter Powell?
I grew up in Greensboro. Went to the University of North Carolina on a football scholarship. So I've been a jock most of my life, not so much now. 22 years ago, I was at a Young Life meeting, and Ben Brewer showed up in a power chair. Ben has significant cerebral palsy. We decided that we would meet at least once with Ben and his friends, and had an awful meeting, but we had fun, and Jesus got lifted up. Fast forward to 11 years ago, and David's Table was formed. We are about adults with disabilities. We are about being a resource to resources, and we want to help churches to pursue our friends and their families to come to worship and serve and be a part of community. We get into all kinds of stuff, and it's so much fun, and we're just glad for Special Olympics and all that y'all do.
Well,
This is going to be a great conversation.
I know, hon. I know. I'm already trying not to laugh over top of Skeeter, but this is going to be great. So, as many of our guests have had the opportunity to do as we've been talking about different topics, sometimes our listeners may not know all of the ins and outs of specific phrases or words, or maybe I know myself, have learned that sometimes I'm using them maybe not in their intended purpose. So what we'd like to do, lightning round, whoever wants to take the word or phrase, it doesn't matter. But let's just put a little bit of a definition on some things so that we can have a level playing field, no pun intended, in our conversation. So the first word is inclusion. What does that mean?
I get to play. Doesn't matter who you are.
Okay. Easily.
I get to be involved. I get to be a part of the group.
Okay. What about you, Carly?
It may be jumping ahead, but I think one of the best ways to look at inclusion is to compare it to accessibility. And when I think about inclusion, it's making sure that everyone actually really wants to participate. So to me, accessibility, everyone can participate. Sure, we have these things, we have all the things in place to make sure that everyone can, but inclusion, really making sure that everyone wants to be there. Everybody's having a good time. Everybody's included and together.
I love that. That's so good. That's so good. Okay, so let's talk about this one, adaptive sports. I think I understand, but let's clarify it.
Adaptive sports can really encompass anything that we do to give that equal access to somebody who maybe can't participate in a quote unquote typical way. So that could be a physical modification. It could be equipment changes. It could be rule changes, just anything to make that a more inclusive environment for all to participate in.
Can you give a little example?
Sure. So it could be anything from wheelchair basketball, where everyone, whether or not they actually live their world in a wheelchair, is in a wheelchair. So that's equal. It could be changing handles on hockey sticks so that everybody is able to actually use them if they're not physically able. It could be kayaking with a partner. If you're not able, but you want to get in the water, you want to kayak, but you can't actually use the paddle. It could be having a partner in there with you.
Okay. All right. Excellent. What about you, Skeeter? Anything to add?
Well, I just think it would mean that I get to play. And that may mean that I get to sit in a sled to play hockey. It may mean that I get 2 bounces if I'm playing wheelchair tennis. It may be that with wheelchair basketball, and wheelchair is not the only kind of sports. There are lots of folks who are sports minded, who play tennis, who can't see. There are folks who run track with a partner who can't see. There are lots of ways that we can adapt sports.
Excellent. So let's talk about this one, the disability rights movement, how I understand that as it intersects with education coming from the classroom as a teacher. But let's talk about this in sports. What does that mean?
Again, it's really all about those equal opportunities and just ensuring that while we're not just programming for one specific demographic of people, that we're really thinking about the world and thinking about all different types of people while we're programming sports.
And I think it means that there are some really phenomenal athletes who are disabled, but they're just some average people who sit in wheelchairs or who can't see. And to be able to play some sports, whether I'm good or not, is to me so important that I have availability on a tennis court, or there's a basketball court that I can play on, that people expect me to show up. And I'm not very good by athletic standards, but I'm wonderful as far as I'm concerned. I just want to be able to play.
Right. And so I would imagine then also having the accessibility to get to that tennis court. So if it's the only way to that tennis court is stairs, there might need to be a way to get to that tennis court or wherever. So, okay, I'm starting to think about that a little bit more. Yeah, that's great.
We kind of frame it too as, the accessibility of of us being able to program. So that means us securing volunteers, us securing coaches, facilities. So it's really incorporating the whole community to make sure it's not just a physical adaptation to make it accessible. It's a lot more than that to make sure that our athletes are successful in whatever the word successful means to them.
I love that. So step right into that since you just kind of began to unpack it. What is accessibility in sports?
Again, it's really making sure that we are providing the opportunities for everyone to be able to participate. And as Skeeter mentioned, it's not always about a super competitive game. Sometimes it is, and that's amazing. That's awesome. But, when I think about when I played sports, some of my most favorite memories are playing with my team and having those connections. And my team that I went to high school with, we were never great. We never won a lot of games. We struggled through the seasons a lot of times, but we bonded over that. And it was some of my favorite friendships, my best friends that were made. So it's so much more than just playing a sport.
A story comes to mind. We had a young fella here who loved to play wheelchair basketball. And in order to find a team that was, quote, good enough for him to play on, we had to go to Charlotte once a week to play. We went to Denver 2 different years to play in the Nationals. He was offered a college scholarship to go play wheelchair basketball. Now, let's flash forward, and there is a wheelchair basketball team here that I believe the hospital system sponsors that started out with very young players. It was hard for them to push the chair and dribble. My understanding is it flashed forward 3 or 4 years, and that team is going to nationals, I believe in Oklahoma, seeded 3rd out of a whole bunch of teams. And
Wow.
It's been fun to watch, given the opportunity to have a group of young boys and girls come from, I can hardly push my chair and I got to play on an 8-foot basket for me to even think about scoring, to be able to go to nationals ranked 3rd on a regulation basketball court.
Amazing.
They had an opportunity.
Yeah. And I love what you were saying too, Carly, about it's more than just equipment. It's the people also. And I think that's such an important thing to think about as we're starting this conversation, because maybe some of our listeners haven't considered that there's a lot more to considering accessibility in sports. So I appreciate that. Thank you all so much.
Absolutely.
Well, in the interest of full disclosure, I should let you know that this is the first time I've ever met Carly, but I have known Skeeter for probably 15 years.
Careful.
But I don't know how you started David's Table. When I first met you, you were still with Camp Capernaum. So would you mind sharing the story of David's Table?
Okay. Well, basically started with Young Life. Young Life Capernaum is that part of Young Life that is involved with high school students with disabilities. Around 2008, when the economy was not real good, I was 65, and the company that I worked for, I got downsized. And at that point, I had to decide whether I was going to go back and do that some more or do my passion, because my passion had already become my friends with disabilities and the people that were volunteering. So Kathy and I sat down and decided that a nonprofit would be good. We called it David's Table. There's a story behind that too. That was 11 years ago. And I like to say that for 9 years, we piddled with Jesus. And it was a very slow growth, very solid growth. 2 years ago, we began to think about the future, and some people figured that, hey, Skeeter's old, but this is a good thing that's happening. So over a period of time, we were told you need to have a succession plan and a strategic plan, and both of those have been implemented now. The strategic plan involves adults with disabilities, because when our friends get out of high school, there's not a whole bunch available to them. So adults with disabilities and their families, a resource to resources. We might not be the resource, but hey, we know Carly, so we can tell folks where Special Olympics is if they want to be involved there. And then we want to encourage churches to be involved with our friends as well. Now, Katie Mitchell is the executive director, and boy, she is a bunch of years as a Navy chief. She was in charge of a lot of people. She is backing down from a job at a hospital here, being in charge of MRIs and mammography, in charge of 25 or 30 people. She can put things in a row and get them done. Keith Finch, 34 years as a special ed teacher. He's the program director, and I have the best title in the whole wide world. I am the storyteller in chief. I can run my mouth. But there's so many wonderful stories to tell. I mean, they're easy stories to tell. I'm sure Carly's got hundreds about her friends who've been involved at Spearhead or Special Olympics. And Carly, there's so many sports that you guys sponsor. I mean, it's amazing. My favorite sport, I learned about this when we traveled some with wheelchair basketball, wheelchair rugby.
Wow.
It's a very loud sport. And the person who can weld the chairs back together is the most important part of the team. Just Google wheelchair rugby hits.
Oh my gosh.
I can't even imagine.
Sounds amazing.
Okay, before we move on, can you tell us just in the last 2 decades, what's the biggest change you've noticed in accessibility, Skeeter?
Well, architecturally, there are lots of things that people have to do. And because there've been a couple of decades, lots of things have changed. It doesn't mean it's the best. It just means it's better. It doesn't consider all of our friends. I think for some folks, I don't want to make it too simple, but when we have new folks come on board, we tell them the best thing you can do is say hello. That will break down all sorts of barriers. So there is a little bit of a move toward inclusion, not because we have to, but because people are discovering that those folks with disabilities that might be a little hard to understand or might be a little slower are really good friends taking the time to do that.
That's wonderful. And, stories is such an important thing. And we've talked about it on other episodes too, Holland, about the importance of story and why we tell stories and why that's such an integral part of conversation. So, Carly, you're director of Special Olympics. Do you have a story you can share of how accessibility has impacted athletes, families, and volunteers?
Yeah, I would love to. It's actually one of my favorite stories from recently. And it's one of my favorites because it comes from a volunteer's perspective. So we had a woman reach out who was interested in getting her 2 young sons involved to volunteer with us. And the boys are 9 and 13, I believe. So they started volunteering with our basketball season. We weren't really sure how, in what capacity they were going to help out with. Since they were so young, we just weren't sure what role they would play. But that first practice they came, they jumped right in. They played alongside our athletes. Our athletes loved them. They loved the athletes. And they really meshed well with our team and really took on the environment of inclusion. So a week or 2 passes and the mom comes back up to me and she says, we go home and this is all the boys talk about. This is all we talk about now in our family. They love the athletes. They love the stories they come home with. Before bed, they individually pray for each athlete. It engulfs their whole world now. And one of my favorite things she said, and it's something that actually a lot of our volunteers often feel, is that she said, we came into this thinking we would help the athletes. That was our goal, but we didn't realize how much it was really going to help us. And it really says it all. And now the boys are going to play in our state basketball tournament as unified partners. So they're going to play on our team with us. And so really making the experience accessible for our athletes and our volunteers and our unified partners in the community. It's what makes the experience so special for everyone involved.
Wow. And that goes back right into what you were sharing, Skeeter, about those connections. When you say hello to somebody, you break down that barrier. And, here these young 9 and 13-year-old have stepped into that arena and made lifelong friends. And fantastic is that on both sides of the equation. That's wonderful. Thank you.
We like to talk about story and language and how it affects the way that we see certain topics or issues. How do you think the language and the imagery that's been used in publicity and marketing and media coverage of sporting events with people with disabilities, how has that language helped or hindered the way we view athletes with disabilities?
I mean, it's obvious that with the Olympics, an awful lot of time was spent on traditional Olympics. I know that there are Paralympics. I had more difficulty finding that to watch, even though some of those folks are just phenomenal athletes. So I think there's still a long way to go with sports, both the availability of sports for our friends, as well as the use of technology to show wonderful athletes in their element. There are things to do sport-wise for our friends. It's harder to find, it's harder to know about, just because the folks who are, and I'm rambling here, but I think the folks who are involved are so passionate about it that they're engulfed in what their passion is and have little time for publicizing. I may be mistaken about that, but I think more people would participate if they knew about it. And then, I mean, hey, can we talk about transportation? Can we talk about equipment? When I was growing up, I had a catcher's mitt, a fielder's mitt, a second baseman's glove, and a first baseman's glove. I mean, I had so much equipment, but it was made for me. And there's so much equipment that's not made for our friends. And so much of it is so expensive, it makes it difficult. How do you get a basketball chair home into practice and to games? I know they come apart, but it's still, I mean, if you got a team of 10, there are still issues there. Getting better, but there's still issues.
Great points.
Carly, did you want to add anything to that?
I think kind of going back to the media and how they portray people with special needs, a lot of the time it seems the image that they want to put out is almost a quote unquote poster child. It's a very, very cute kid with a very recognizable disability or in a wheelchair. And of course, we serve very cute kids with disabilities and we serve people in wheelchairs. But there's so much that is missed in that representation a lot of the times. And it's just the full picture isn't always displayed of what disabilities look like and what they don't look like. And so in a world where we are really pushing to represent all types of people, and you see it on the news and you see in movies now where we're really including all types of people, it seems like the media, as far as disabilities go, sometimes miss that point and kind of it skews how the population sees our athletes. They see one look a lot of the time, and it's just not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, those are great points. We had an episode, our very first season, talking about how disability is represented in children's books. And just even that view is so skewed, and we've got a long way to go, but really appreciate that. I know it's not always fun to talk about the negative parts of the story, but it is part of the story, and we want to change that as we move forward. And hopefully this conversation will be part of that change. So as we close this first episode, go ahead, Skeeter.
Okay, I was going to say there's a wonderful video out now of a young fella in a swim meet, swimming butterfly, and he has no arms, and he wins the heat. That's amazing. But what's just as amazing is when Amanda comes to play tennis on Tuesday morning at 11 o'clock, and on the fifth ball that you drop for her to hit, she touches it. And on the seventh ball that you drop, she actually hits it, and two more attempts, and it goes over the net. And that is amazing. I'm going to bet that most of the folks who come to play Special Olympics, maybe the start is not that slow. They're not hitting the ball over the fence the first day. And the patience that folks have, like at Special Olympics, to stick with it, sometimes for days, sometimes for months, and occasionally for years, for somebody to become, quote, good. And maybe some more TV time for the Amandas of the world, along with a young fellow with no arms who won the butterfly event.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that's definitely part of the magic of coming to a Special Olympics season, and part of what invokes that feeling for volunteers that they didn't know how much it would help them. You're rooting these athletes on, and of course, like we said, it's amazing when you have that one person who can go really far, but a lot of the time it's a small goal. It's something day to day that we're working on. And when the athlete hits that small goal, it is just, it's amazing. And the support that they get from not only the volunteers, but the other athletes, they're rooting each other on as well. It's such a cool experience.
That's awesome.
Now, I'm going to go ahead and say it, Amy and Holland, if you really want to know, you want to show up at Special Olympics practice. You want to come Tuesday and play tennis with us and just see. And that'll become a part of the podcast. You'll find some things that are just absolutely amazing, not only with the athletes who are special, but with the volunteers who have come and have come out from behind whatever they were hiding behind because they were scared of our friends.
Yep.
And now they are their friends. Come on.
I used to coach Special Olympics, so I've been there.
Okay.
So let's close out this first part of our podcast conversation, because we've got a few more questions we want to talk about for part two. Carly, what's an essential element we need to understand as we think about the stories of accessibility in sports?
I mean, I think it all boils down to the fact that everyone wants to be included, and everyone deserves to be included. And that doesn't just mean sports. It really is in all things in life. So I think that's definitely like the hitting point there. And you also, as I mentioned before, you might not realize the impact that you have on someone else's life, but also the impact that they can have on yours. And it's a pretty cool experience to get to feel that for the first time with some of our athletes.
Well said. What about you, Skeeter? What's an essential element? Boil it down.
To me, it's just to have a relationship with someone who's different than you. That is so powerful. It's easy to be on the side of somebody who needs a wheelchair to play basketball. I mean, your mother's wheelchair isn't going to do. It takes a little bit more for somebody who can't see to hit a beeping softball, and to be there and advocate for your friend is amazing.
Wonderful. And I love how you said at the beginning of our definition round, I get to play. I love that. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Yes, thank you both, Carly and Skeeter. This has been a wonderful conversation. Your stories and your evaluation of the stories that we often hear about people with disabilities who play sports have really been eye-opening, I think. So while we wait for part two, please go to theafterwordpodcast.com and become a subscriber. Leave us a review and tell your friends about us. And as always, remember that you are welcome at our table.